Matthew Wong asks me, what does your voice sound like? This is a very, very serious question to me. It's a very meaningful question. You might think that I've kind of answered it already, but I kind of want to unanswer it. I want to kind of mew this question. I wrote an answer on Quora to this, well, at least the introduction, of which this video will be the sort of second part to it. So I want to read what I wrote, and that's going to make a little bit of a point, and then I want to spiel about what I'm getting at with the use of some props. So, this is actually a profound question to me. It calls us to consider all aspects of personal and informative experience. I constantly muse on the word as described in the Gospel of John, the Logos. What form does it take? What is its function? What you see here, see here in this picture or on the text, what you see here, my words. In what way do they communicate me? In what way do they not? Words can convey all sorts of things, but whether those things are what is intended is a different question. There is something unique about a voice, something deeply identifying, that which resonates as projected expression of a being. It is different to the trapped light of text frozen in time. It is dynamic. But how does a voice reach us, voce? How does a voice reach us? In what way is it the same as how it started? With all this in mind, here is a partial answer. And this is the partial answer. The auditory information coming through an iPhone. Is it capturing my voice? Is this my voice? Well, sort of. One thing that I love to think about is the nature of resonance and how all parts of matter interact, all parts of matter are joined by energy. And of course, that sort of what I always refer to as hypostasis, a commingling of energy and matter moving between one another, is what, in my understanding, creates time, oscillatory motion, periodic functions. This is how we know things are happening, because of movement, and because of movements that interact with one another, it influence one another. And this is the beautiful sort of butterfly effect that spreads outwards and returns inwards and inwards. And probably nowhere is this seen more clearly, even though it's not seen at all much of the time, than in auditory information, than in the way that sound moves from my larynx and my vocal cords here through this obstructive anatomy of my oropharyngeal airway and out projected into this space, this what I like to call the echo chamber, my little recording studio here. And yet, of course, it's being transduced and transmitted and translated, and all of these things are happening that are getting this sound through to you. And I think some really, really beautiful things are happening which say some important things about the nature of information, the nature of knowledge, the nature of epistemology, all these sort of things that I like to think of that transmit truth and translate truth and are metaphorical in the true sense of that word, the way that things move between, that metaphorine sort of consideration. So, some props. Firstly, the room itself. There are all sorts of sonic mysteries going on even in a space like this. This is quite a small space, but you know, some of the best acoustic engineers in the world struggle to get even tiny spaces accurately replicated and to calculate what's happening in all of this space. And of course, what's receiving this whole space is this tiny little iPhone camera. I have a few, little iPhone microphone. I have a few microphones. Here's a Beta 58 Shure microphone. There's a couple of large condensers, which you're just going to believe me. Here's another condenser sitting over here. There's a warm audio condenser. So I've got a whole bunch of microphones, all of which do slightly different things. Why? Isn't there just one sound? Can't we just capture that? Doesn't it sort of make itself obvious in some way? But of course, there are so many features to what makes a sound, just on the production side, just in this space. Air pressure and density and things like literally moisture in the air make a difference, because all these particles, all this kinetic energy floating around in this space completely invisibly are contributing to the sound. So really, as much as I am making it in a way, this sound is the whole world. No part of what is occurring in this space and being received by that tiny one is irrelevant. It's all acting together. It's all resonating. It's all synergistic in a very interesting sense, which I kind of mused on in an answer once about Romans 8 and predestination. In what sense is there not this predictability to how my vocal sort of movements will then produce what gets received? Can it not be calculated? Can't we synthesize these things? Is it not predetermined in some sense? And yet, there is chaos in all of what's going on at the moment. There are fluctuations and, interruptions and, objects obstructing things and, the Nyquist effect. It goes on and on and on. And yet, despite all of that manic rambling going on, you get a sentence spoken clearly enough to be received and to be understood. And to me, that is completely miraculous. The idea that information is being maintained in all of that, not despite it. It's the way it works. All of this is actually still holding together in this infinitely complicated set of interactions, which I like to refer to as resonance, because the whole world moves with the energy. But of course, not in a vacuum, and not where there is enough space between things to interact, not when we have enough of a proximity effect being removed as we move away, and the whole consistency of the transmission changes due to space, due to time. One more part of this sort of thought before we get onto the way that this sound is being translated and transmuted is to think about audio to digital and digital to audio conversion via the absolutely mystical fast Fourier transforms, where we are seeing things broken up into their component frequencies, this translation from spatial domains to time domains and back, which allows this difference between frequencies and their waveforms. It's really quite profound. I refer to Fourier analysis and Fourier transformation as space-time being divided and multiplied again. And I just think that's quite pretty. Anyway, so we've had a little bit of a think about space and about resonance, about matter and energy acting together in a way that is both predictable and unpredictable, to allow what's happening here to move out, to be disseminated. And of course, there's a whole lot that happens within the reception factor as well. Is it the speaker or the hearer that matters here? Well, one thing I wanted to use as a prop is the consideration of Fletcher-Munson curves and the equal loudness contours. We don't hear sound at the pressure that it's necessarily existing at in the environment that I was just speaking of. It's condensed, it's codified, it's turned into a format that suits us. I like to use this analogy of having coffee in your cup. And the really, really profound thing about how that perceptual curve is what is really a frequency response curve, like a microphone, occurs, is it's actually individual. I'll try and link this paper which comes... Oh, I just realised that it might not actually be visible. But this is a great paper from Scientific Reports reporting the spiral form of the human cochlea and how it relates more to spatial constraints than the famous golden ratio. Everyone loves to talk about the cochlea being almost a golden ratio. But really, when they had a very good look at 138 human cochleae, there are unique features, that there's this broad variation of actual anatomy and actual structure, and it's got more to do with the space that you've got to work with in the temporal bone than it has to do with anything else. And I think that's utterly profound, this idea that really no eye is like another and no ear is like another. We are all actually dealing with completely individualized perceptual experiences due to shared yet variant anatomy. Just as no spaces are the same, just as no voices are exactly the same, but they can be close. And that in itself is just gets down to what to me is the basis of all information, the difference between similarity and difference. One other sort of thing worth thinking about is the nature of media. This is one of my favorite little textbooks, Neuroanatomy Through Clinical Cases by Hal Blumenfeld. And looking at the cochlea, which I really think is possibly the most poetic structure in the whole of nature, we see this movement from air through, of course, the tympanic membrane, being transmitted through, again, the resonance of the malleolus, the incus and the stapes, through the oval window, and being transmitted down through this gorgeous cochlea, but then out again. So the pressure wave, makes its way down through the endolymphatic fluid, doing this wonderful sort of interface between air, membrane, and then fluid. But then it makes its way out to the oval window as well. So there's this reflective mechanism. And in amongst all that is really Newtonian sort of forces, the effects of momentum and inertia in the action of the otoliths on the gelatinous layer of the hair cells. So I sometimes seriously dream about the actions of the cochlea here and how this translates into what is not quite a digital signal, not quite a on or off, fire or don't fire sort of neurological mechanism. It's a little more analog than that. There are some semi-threshold effects that influence the likelihood of there being another action potential. But then even in our brainstem here, in this really central reflection again across the midline, all of these structures which have such profound influences on the rest of our sensation, looking at the geniculate nuclei. I mean, here this is medial, the lateral is more involved in sight, but these are all resonating again together in their neuroanatomy. And again, individually. So how is my voice, my incarnation in energy being expelled here, interacting with this chaotic, variable space, making its way through multiple translations, transmutations, and codifications, actually getting to you? And in what way is it able to express my intent, all this inflection, all this stumbling over things, all this incoherence that yet hopefully will be getting across a message about messages in a very meta way, which is complementary to text and yet separate and not conflatable with what goes down on a page and what people might usually experience of me on a website. I think all of those things are really beautiful considerations to take to heart as you hear this, however you're hearing it, in again, Bluetooth earbuds or a $15,000 hi-fi system. We are all audiophiles in a way, but we're audiophiles because we love what sound is to us, what we make of sound. And really, the whole world participates in that. The whole world has conspired together, if you will, to create the structures we depend on to do this. And yet, there is something coming through here. There is perhaps a logic, perhaps a meaning, or not. If we are deaf, if we are lacking in some part of the necessary chain of trust that allows this message to be conveyed, then we won't hear what I said. We will hear distortions. We will then fill in the gaps like tinnitus, perhaps, to make meaning out of something which was perhaps an Obama-like pause. Or we will possibly intuit from observation of other factors, gesticulations, other observations. Lip reading is a great example of this. The YouTube videos about lip reading are fantastic examples of how we will project assumptions onto things that we can't quite interpret. And I think that all of that is concerning. All of that is unsettling when we think about what we receive from people as what they said. One need only look at politics to see how that can happen in completely different hemispheres. But also who someone is and in what way their voice and their behavior and their intonation and their inflection and their intentionality is conveyed in an energy and a resonance which has left them, but of course transmits them.